Get to the chopper! Here's Johnny.
This is Sparta!
So serious. Autobots, roll out.
I am Iron Man. This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to the new podcast presented by the female film critics of InSession Film. We are speaking, we love movies, we are women in session. We have wanted to talk about sports movies for a while. I feel like we've had a sports curse on this episode because it's just gotten lost in the shuffle and bumped for so many other things and lost and delayed. But we are here now. Technology and time zones are cooperating with us because we wanted to talk about sports movies. Yes, we are women who like sports movies. We'll get into it. Not necessarily just women's sports movies, but they both do seem underrepresented. Women who like sports movies and sports movies with women. But Erica, I know you feel very strongly. Tell us why you think baseball movies are the best, because you have written about that for InSessionFilm.com.
Yes. And I just want to say we're also... Well, I am also, I don't know about both of you, but I'm going to just go bold and say this. We are also women who like sports. I love sports. I still play sports. I'm in my 30s and I still play like on co-ed sports teams. I grew up playing sports my whole life and sports are very important to me. So not only are we women who like sports movies, but we are women who like sports. I am an avid, Ravens Orioles fan. I have season tickets to both. So also just a woman who likes sports and appreciate when I say that, not being quizzed about what.
No, Erica Richards, you're at E-Rock Reviews on Twitter, but your E-Rock Instagram is where we can see all of your crazy Ravens action, I should say.
Right. Yes.
Zita Short is here as well. And I'm curious how she feels about baseball, because I don't think baseball is very popular in New Zealand. Is it, Zita?
Well, that's the thing. It's not popular over here. I've never played it. And yet, as Erica has pointed out, it's so effective when it's used in a movie. And I think it really says something that even as a non-American, even as someone who usually rolls their eyes at the jingoism and the false sentimentality, I watch something like The Natural and I find myself tearing up during the final scene. And I can't fully explain it. Largely, it's very successful, emotionally manipulative filmmaking. But I do think that as a sport, it's so well implemented in cinema, in part because you have that sense of a national myth standing behind it. And I don't know if you have that with other sports. Even something like soccer feels too international in my eyes. Whereas baseball, I know it's very big in a lot of other countries, but it does feel specifically tied to American culture and American traditions in a way that other sports don't.
We jumped right in. I started pressing record because I said, we're already talking about it. We may as well get this stuff down on the podcast. Now, I'm Kristin Battestella for I Think Therefore Review. I should say myself. I always forget myself because I'm ready to pit you girls at each other. But I will say ice hockey definitely does have a Canadian nationalism, even though it's actually not the national sport. Lacrosse is. But hockey is hardcore in Canada, of course. And ironically, though, I mean, I immediately was like, I expect people to expect me to talk about the Mighty Ducks, but I actually even was leaning more towards baseball movies. You're right, though, because there is just something about a baseball movie. I feel like, I don't know if that part of that is because, I don't know, baseball lends itself to TV, because when you're watching a baseball game, it can be incredibly boring. Like, I've had to explain this to my husband. I'm like, you have to be excited. You have to know all these stupid finite rules for when something magical happens. And then there's like a double play or a triple play and boom, an inning is over. And you're like, what just happened? It happened so fast. But yet baseball movies, you're right, tug at those heartstrings. Erica?
Okay, sorry. I know I went on a rant, but I do want to answer your first question about why baseball movies are the best. And baseball movies are the best because baseball is the best sport. And I will stand by this and I will explain why I make this argument. Now, I love football, American football, whatever. I love a lot of other sports. I've played a lot of other sports, but baseball is the best. And I'm going to quote Earl Weaver here. He was a famous Orioles coach, okay, back in the day. And there's this quote at Camden Yards at the stadium near the World Series trophies. There's a quote above it from him, and it says, "You can't hold the ball and let the time run out, let the clock run out," whatever it says. You have to throw the ball over the plate and give the other man his shot. And that's why baseball is the best sport, because it's not like basketball or football where you can, the last 2 minutes or minute and a half, whatever of a game, it comes down to, and you can just dribble the ball or hold the ball or take a knee in football or whatever. In baseball, you have to throw the pitch. You have to give the other team their chance. And that's why baseball is the greatest sport of them all, because there is nothing that can sway a game like baseball. Like, it's one pitch, and like you said, you can hit into a triple play in one pitch, or you can completely change the score of a game by one swing of one pitch and hit the ball over the fence. That's why baseball is the greatest sport of all. You have to give the other
baseball
team.
movies.
Yeah.
Baseball movies know how to manipulate that, because it'll come down to a final strikeout. It'll come down to somebody calling their shot. And we're good into this because some of the movies we love have these exact cliches. It'll be like somebody stealing home base, like a lot of the things that are kind of actually obscure when you actually watch a game. But they know how to, like, and it's the same thing with even like Teen Wolf comes down to like the final foul shot, free throws, or everything comes down to a penalty shot in hockey. They know how to use the best aspects of the sport. Guess they just kind of match, I guess, cinema movie making magic in a way. Now, on your list, you had things categorized differently, but I noticed on your list, and one of the ones you wanted to mention tonight was more recent, Moneyball.
I love Moneyball. First of all, Brad Pitt's never been hotter. I don't care what anyone says. He is sexy as hell in that movie. Okay. Like, have you both seen Moneyball? Please tell me you've seen Moneyball.
Yes.
He's never been hotter. I don't care what anyone says. He's never, okay, maybe in Troy. He was really hot in Troy, but I don't know. He's got this thing about him in Moneyball. I also love Jonah Hill's character in Moneyball, like would die for that character. But why I love Moneyball is because it's really about the game, right? Like, it really, really is the one that's about the game. And I think that's something that's really special about that movie, is that, yes, it's about a lot of other things, but it's really about how he figured out how the game works, right?
Yes, it really is. And it takes a far more intellectual standpoint on the game, you would argue, in looking at it from, is he the general manager for the team? He works in management and he recruits players and he deals with the financial side of the business. And usually we expect that to be the part of sports stories that you don't really see, because most of the excitement happens out on the pitch or out on the field. But this film really bases it around the mindset of this man. And of course, you have his tragic backstory where he was drafted in a high position and then just never really took off as a player. And so he's carrying around all of this guilt and this shame. And he sees this as his shot at redemption. And then you also have these questions over whether statistics or sort of fancy statistics should be employed more in the recruitment business. And so it captures the baseball industry during this period in which it was going through very significant changes. And I think for a lot of film critics, especially because they see so many movies, it is very easy to look down on a lot of the films that are your cliche sports film. And I think Moneyball came as a real surprise in the early 2010s, in that it does commit to taking a different approach to telling the underdog story. And that might have been why it ends up getting those Oscar nominations and I believe becomes a pretty big hit. I know dads love this movie. So
yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head, right? It took a different approach where it was telling the behind the scenes story of running a baseball team as opposed to following the players, right? Like the players were a very, very minor part of this story. That's why I love it so much, because and like you said, we all know or have been that person that could have been, you know, a professional athlete and had something happen that brought them out of it, but they can't let go of the game. And that's the other part that I really love about the movie is Brad Pitt. Like, he can't watch the games. Like, he's just like, you're so ingrained in it. And it's hard when you are an athlete. Like, I like I said, I still play games, obviously slow pitch, like nothing like serious, whatever, but we are like my team's competitive, whatever. But when I'm in a game, I'm fine. But watching other, like if it's an intense game, I'm like, oh my God, you know, like whatever it is, right? Whether it's like professional or just other games, because you're not in it. And I think that's something that's so relatable in that film. When you're watching, you can relate. If you are someone who played the game or played sports or whatever, you can relate to Brad Pitt's feeling where it's just like, nope, I have to go to the weight room and like lift weights and do something else that takes me away from it because I can't watch the game because I want to be in the game, you know? I love that aspect of it. And I also, I mean, it's a simple game, right? Like you're saying there's like a lot of rules and stuff, and there really are, but it really is a simple game, you know? It's straightforward. You know what you need to do to win the game. You have to score more runs than the other team. You have to get this many outs and, you know, this amount of time, you know, it really is a simple game, but it's so complex, right? And I think it really breaks the mold. It shows the breaking the mold of these like old white men that all thought the same way, recruited the same way for so many years. It was like, this is the way it's always been done. And he's like, no, this is how we will win. And he was right, you know? And I just love watching these two guys, you know, the Jonah Hill character and the Brad Pitt character, like just come together like an odd little couple and just like completely blow everyone's mind. It's great. Like, I love it. It's so fun to watch. It's so fun to watch.
It's so funny. Like I said, it's like a recent movie and it's actually like 10 years old. And now they talk about in ice hockey how they're finding all these new positions for like statisticians and like data analytics because they want to study all these numbers and mathematics. And it's so funny. You made me think of, I had a couple films on my broad list here. It made me think of the antithesis going way back when you had around about the same time, 8 Men Out and Field of Dreams, which are the total kind of opposite ends of the spectrum in like the hope and positivity of baseball and like kind of the corrupt kind of bleak history, you know. But it's actually been a while since I followed professional baseball. I mean, I just got really put out by the whole, you know, all the steroid investigations and all that. It was so disappointing to me. I had been a hardcore Yankees fan before that. You know, I still would love to Andy Pettitte get in the Hall of Fame, but
you're from Philly? Wait, you're a Yankees fan, but you're from Philly? That doesn't happen.
Yeah. Well, it's New Jersey is the state tapped at both ends. I mean, come on. Yeah, my grandfather was a huge Phillies fan, like back in the 80s day, you know, and back when they kind of stunk then, but like the Flyers kind of stink now. And it's funny, we were honing in on baseball games. I thought that you would both come out right the gate with Any Given Sunday because Zita's got surprises on her list. I thought you'd all be talking about football. Life is a game of inches. Erica had her quotes.
Surprisingly, I don't have any football movies on my list just because they're just okay.
Well, football, I do think it's different when we were talking about the universal appeal. Like you said, at the same instance, anybody can get up and play baseball. And I remember when my nieces tried playing baseball for a couple of years, and there was one little girl who she swung and she missed, but the catcher dropped the ball on her third strike. And like the whole crowd went, run! And this little girl got like so scared. She's like, why is everyone yelling at me to run? And we're going, no, run. And she's like going real slow towards like first base. Like, is this what I'm supposed to be doing? Are you sure? You know, but football has so many. Like, I did tune in a few years ago when the Eagles were winning the Super Bowl, and I'm looking at the screen with all these graphics of these computer lines and digital like markers explaining like the downs to everybody. And I'm thinking, oh, this is so unfair. When I was a kid, man, you just had to know the rules. You didn't have anything on screen telling you what was happening. You had to pay attention, you know. But so yeah, I football I feel is a little more insular. I don't know. I don't know that it necessarily comes across on screen, but I think Any Given Sunday works because it's almost, is it not even necessarily about the football? I don't know.
I guess,
Like we're saying, sometimes the baseball is about everything but the baseball. Zita?
No, I think that's a fair assessment of Any Given Sunday, in that it's basically this big, overcooked soap opera about the drama going on behind the scenes, and where something like Moneyball sort of takes a restrained approach to dramatizing all of that. There aren't scenes where Brad Pitt goes off on a long tangent and berates Jonah Hill, whereas in Any Given Sunday, every character is at 11 in terms of where their emotional state is. And Cameron Diaz is doing so much, and Margaret shows up. It's very much the Oliver Stone version of a sports movie, and most of his films have this sort of campy appeal, even though he was treated like a serious director for a period during the 80s. But I think there is something sort of unintentionally funny about how over the top so many of his films are. And I think that approach really works with something like Nixon, which is so much weirder than your average biopic about a president would be. And in Any Given Sunday, it sort of works. At the same time, when he tries to tackle issues related to race relations and the question of whether team owners are exploiting their players who primarily come from racial minority backgrounds, the movie sort of loses its way, and you think, Oliver Stone doesn't really seem like the person to deal with these very complex issues. And you get these scenes where Al Pacino is trying to relate to Jamie Foxx, and it's so on the nose. He walks up to him, he starts talking about some sort of Italian jazz artist, saying, "Oh, is that what you listen to?" Jamie Foxx says, "No, I listen to rap music." And you think, okay, maybe accurate, but we need to make this a little bit less on the nose. Again, capture the subtleties of the racism that is unfortunately embedded into almost every facet of American society.
But it's a football movie, and I dare say football in itself is also very on the nose. You know, okay. And to me, these Oliver Stone, I mean, we'll get into Charlie Sheen, of course, but like things like Platoon, there's just certain topics that are just so big that they're just only Oliver Stone can direct them. And I feel like and even tonight to me, it's overlong, but it's like that on the nose is just the perfect topic. I feel like for Oliver Stone, like all the extra, like spiking a football, all the touchdown kind of dances, you know, it's like, that's just the nature of the sport. And Zita's looking for more complex things because it's supposed to be this serious scene chewing kind of drama. But at the same time, I'm like, I don't know. I wouldn't expect that from Any Given Sunday. I don't know why. You know, one of the things I actually had on my list, because you were talking about soccer, you know, I love Bend It Like Beckham. I'm not a soccer fan at all. I could care less about the World Cup Qatar stuff, that's the Qatar that's going on now kind of stuff, you know. But the thing I love about it is, well, soccer is just the background. It's just the thing that brings all this diversity together, you know. And I feel like it's such a wonderful, charming movie. Shout out for Jonathan Rhys-Meyers if we're talking about hotness in the movies. Erica, did you have counterpoint on Any Given Sunday?
Honestly, Zita? I don't think I've seen it. Now that you guys are talking about it,
oh my gosh.
I don't think I've seen this.
It's old.
Yeah. I don't think I've seen it. Maybe it's just one of those that, like, I've either seen clips or.
Do you have any other recommendations?
What?
A big speech. Yeah, that's about the big Al Pacino speech clips.
Yeah,
scenes. But did you have another football? Because you love football, but I have to give props. I have to give props, in fact, to the Baltimore Ravens. I mean, it's a team named after Edgar Allan Poe. I mean, where else could we have that happening? Of course. Yeah. So you didn't have any other football movies?
No.
Zita, you had surprises. Were we back on baseball? Did you have another baseball movie?
No, sorry. Returning to the football conversation, just a brief note. I think a problem at this point when it comes to dramatizations of American football, we have, I would argue, the iconic American football-based piece of media in the form of Friday Night Lights, which is very successful in bringing the sport to the screen, makes a game that I would argue is not visually compelling in the same way that baseball is interesting for me as a viewer, even someone who barely understands the rules. And you really get to know those characters. It's rooted in such a strong understanding of the struggles faced by people who are living in lower income areas in Texas. And perhaps because it does have this serialized format, when they do try to hit upon the big topics like racism, like steroid use, they have a bit longer to develop those ideas and to really get into the complex dynamics that exist between a lot of the characters. And even for a show from the mid-2000s, it's impressive how well it holds up. You worry, oh God, is there going to be some throwaway piece of dialogue that sounds racist now? And I don't think that's a problem there. It's still really impressive that I guess they were asked to make this show that was meant to be, again, just a soap opera that would fill time, and oh, we're going to target people living in states where this sport is popular. And instead of just being this throwaway Yellowstone style piece of bait for that sort of person, instead, it's this really empathetic, compassionate show that uses the sport as a springboard to talk about these really difficult, challenging topics that are sort of impossible to address, even though we are all aware of them.
Yeah.
That's interesting to think that football has such a short season, but yet, yes, you're right. It does lend itself to long form storytelling. So I was just thinking, I mean, Erica, they changed their name finally to, what do they name themselves now? The Washington Commanders?
Yes, correct.
Finally. Yeah, they changed their name, which, yes, all that racism is blatantly right there in sports so much, and the misuse of the mascots. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna completely agree with what Zita said. Like, that would be my honorable mention, because it was a show, but I loved that show, and I agree with everything you said. I think it was a really well done for the time it was done. Like you said, I don't think there's anything like, looking back on it that was like, ooh, that didn't age well, right? I think they handled it really well, and the characters were like had layers and yeah, I love that show. I would love to get that show a rewatch, actually. And the score is great. The soundtrack's great. Yeah, I love that show. But yeah, football movies, I mean, The Blind Side was controversial, but I liked it because at the end he got drafted to the Ravens, right? And it's what?
Sometimes you're freezing. I don't know if it's me or not.
Sorry.
No,
And yeah, like I said, I mean, I recognize that that's not the best storytelling and the best, narrative.
I think I recall seeing things like The Water Boy or The Replacements, like in between hockey games and hockey tournaments. There was nothing to do but go to the movies in between hockey games, which is kind of strange. We watched some bad football movies. Still on baseball, because we actually had a lot of baseball things on our list. Erica and I, we both love The Sandlot.
Love The Sandlot.
Wonderful, charming, nostalgic. I mean, it made in the 90s, but, throws back further to 60s. And just the simplicity, trying to get the baseball from the other side of the fence with the dog, the race, the run. It still keeps on giving. I don't think it's a movie like we mentioned before in some of our Christmas or holiday favorites, when we dabbled in a little bit of figure skating there. We'll to that too. I don't think it's something that you had to see as a kid or have to have lived in that time. I think it works still itself. It just because it just has such a charming premise and a fun little group of kids, and truly the backyard baseball, getting back to the roots. Because I think you had on your list also honorable mentions like Rookie of the Year, which is really preposterous, but still fun. But I love The Sandlot. Erica, why do you love The Sandlot?
I love The Sandlot. It's also one of those ones that I grew up on, right? I grew up on it. So I think it's that thing where like, not that I can relate to it, but I kind of can, because like, feel like when I was growing up, I was still part of the generation that like went outside and played like pickup games, right? Like, and that whole thing where you're a kid and something like happens, like you know, losing the baseball over the fence, and realizing as an adult that that could very simply easily been solved, but these kids make it so complicated. It's just so funny, and it's so quotable, and you know, everyone knows the Ham, and he's such a favorite, like a famous favorite character, and it really is like, you know, I feel like baseball, well, nowadays soccer has become more of like the sport that all kids play. But back in our day, it was T-ball, right? Like everyone was signed up for T-ball, and everyone played T-ball, and maybe you kept going and played baseball or softball or whatever. But yeah, I don't know. I just think it's that nostalgic thing for me. I love The Sandlot, and
It's not juvenile. I mean, there are silly things in it. There are fun stuff. How can I have some more of nothing? You don't know what a s'more is. Even my mom, a grown-up girl, knew, but like Karen Allen, James Earl Jones, there is, I guess because it's back in the 60s and it's being narrated, you know, there is this double kind of nostalgic, but so adults can relate to it. But then you do have the way it's shot with the dog seemingly so huge, and then it turns out she's not necessarily a monster, the beast, Hercules, you know, because Zita, you had mentioned The Natural. Which I know is completely at the opposite end of the spectrum from The Sandlot. Are you familiar with The Sandlot? Tell us your baseball surprises.
Oh, so I've never seen The Sandlot, so I can't really comment on that one. But I would say that I've seen a fair few baseball movies, and The Natural is definitely up there for me. It's a bit of a guilty pleasure. I can't fully justify my enjoyment of it because so much of it is cheesy and saccharine and emotionally manipulative. But I suppose it says something. What?
Robert Redford being good looking does not factor into that?
Oh, that definitely helps. But I think one of the movie's biggest problems is that Robert Redford isn't really playing a character in the film. The script seems so confused about what his character arc is meant to be and what function he serves in the story. And so what we are greeted with is essentially just lots of shots of him being or looking perfect, where he is lit in this way that highlights all of his best features. The movie, not even in a sexual way, it objectifies him as this representative of American goodness and purity. He looks like he could come out of a Norman Rockwell painting in every shot of this film, even though it's a major plot point that he keeps getting involved with femme fatales who want to ruin his career, another weird aspect of the movie. And yet, I can't deny that the big finale in which he redeems himself and he hits a home run and smashes the lights, and so there are sparks flying everywhere, and then you cut to Glenn Close up in the stands and she looks like an angel. It's all so silly when you consider it out of context, but while watching the film, I can't deny that it does have this blunt force emotional impact.
Now I have to think, what year was that made? Late 70s?
1984.
84. Okay, because I feel like in that era, when I think of The Natural, the word that immediately comes to my mind is like patina. Like it has this period piece look to it. And it's like, that's what's more important. And it kind of, as much as I love The Natural and can get really swept up in it, it kind of also brings about like my pet peeve of sports movies where like the sport has to look good when we see it. Like I hate when the sport looks bad. Like I love the Mighty Ducks, but I feel like I expected everybody to think that I would like shout out the Mighty Ducks, like first and foremost as my favorite, but there are some things in it that are like so preposterous, the flying V and all the tricks that they do on the ice where I'm like, that would never happen. That would never really be allowed. You can't actually do that on the ice. You'd get yelled at, you know? So it's funny that the way sometimes you get swept along and like the beauty of the piece and get emotional. Oh, is baseball bat and the lights, you know? Or you get like so annoyed of like, oh my God, that's inaccurate. They're obviously faking that. They can't really skate. Erica, did we cover all? No, we didn't cover all your baseball movies because I had to say, I've mentioned this on Twitter. My young child self did not know what I was doing. I loved Charlie Sheen. Absolutely adored Charlie Sheen. I was too young to watch Platoon. I watched it anyway. And I love Major League. Hysterical. Again, another one that has a lot of those cliches. He does call a shot, but there is a plot twist to it. All the silly things that would never happen in baseball that still end up happening. And the Cleveland Indians, of course, again, changing their name from all their terrible things. They've even got TP and powwow stuff in the movie. But it's, again, one of those movies where the comedy and the baseball, everything just meshes perfectly. Erica?
I agree. I love Major League. Like you said, it's hilarious. And it's one of those that, like, you can watch it anytime, any day, anywhere, and it still will hit just the same way it hit the first time you saw it. It's funny.
Just a bit outside.
Right. And it's really like an underdog story. It is. And that's why it's charming. Yeah. And the second one, like, I love the second one where the catcher, he gets the yips and he just can't throw it back to the pitcher. Like, again, that's something, like, as an athlete, like, you get the yips, which are just these, like, random things that you have done a million times that you just can't do anymore. And you can't explain it. Your body just won't let you do it. And it's just something that's like, oh my God, like, you just cringe watching it because whether it's happened to you or not, that feeling. And it's just the catcher is so funny. And, like, my boyfriend and I, we still, like, say to each other, like, the one thing the catcher says when he's like, women, you can't live with them and they can't pee standing up. It just has these, like, funny, silly lines in both films, really, that are just, like, I don't know, it's hilarious. And it's just a great,
excellent casting. Just such a likable team. It becomes, even if they're bad at the baseball, it's just such a likable team.
Yeah,
even
like,
if they're
jerks. Yeah.
You root for them. And all the Wild Things stuff was like, yes, please,
Mm-hmm.
Zita, have you seen Major League?
No, yet another iconic baseball movie that I haven't seen. I'm really sorry. I'm letting you guys down.
No, Zita, you're not letting us down. And something tells me I don't think you would like Major League.
Oh. True. With the stripper, the former, like, Vegas showgirl owner, who's trying to do the team under. And I love the whole montage with the every time we win, let's peel a section, and they're peeling off the poster to her and her little pasties.
It's really gritty and rough around the edges, and like, honestly, yeah, it's kind of, I don't know, like, that anti-feminist. I don't know. Like, I'm like, why do I like this? Why do I think it's funny? I don't know.
Renee Russo is the girl who got away from Tom Berenger, and he's in, like, the little club, like, little baseball, like, car, and, like, following her to places and, like, stalking her on the phone. And you look at it now and you're kind of like, geez, this is kind of creepy. She's supposed to be marrying somebody else and he's sneaking around at her, but yet you're rooting for them when she's in the stands. Right. And she doesn't have, like, her engagement ring. And of course there's the big celebration on the field. And you're like, there's so many things I should have problems with this movie, but I love it. And he's, like, reading, like, a comic book version of, like, the books to try and impress her, and then, of course, there's the conflict, Charlie Sheen sleeping with the wife of Corbin Burnson. There's so many conflicting things in it. You're right. I don't think it's Zita's kind of movie.
No, Zita, don't watch it. Yeah. Watch the other ones we mentioned. But honestly, my biggest thing with Major League is that they filmed it in Baltimore. They show the freaking skyline in Baltimore, but they want you to think it's Cleveland. Like, that's offensive. Like, don't do that to my city, okay? That's my biggest thing. Like, no, don't do that.
There is one lesser known baseball movie that I sort of wanted to draw attention to. I don't know if either of you have seen it. Bang the Drum Slowly.
Oh, no.
So it features a really young Robert De Niro in the same year that he made Mean Streets, and it was sort of a breakout role for him. And I think one of the interesting things about this movie is that it focuses on athletes who are not in the major league. They are in a minor league baseball team. And you just get these scenes where, say, they'll be sitting around negotiating with the owner of the team for better pay. And it's just done in such a casual, offhand manner. It's not the most dramatic thing in the world. And it has that quality that a lot of sports movies don't have, where it's almost a hangout movie when they're out on the pitch, when they're playing the game. It doesn't feel like the most dramatic thing in the world, and it acknowledges that, as Erica said, there is this sense that every time someone goes up to bat, anything could happen. But you have a lot of players who are just standing around out there thinking, well, it'll never come near me, might as well keep chatting to my mate. And you get a lot of moments like that sprinkled throughout the film. And the central conceit involves Robert De Niro's character having a terminal illness. And so everyone on the team sort of knows that he's going to die. And they have to wrestle with this question of, oh, do we treat him more kindly now because we feel sympathy for him? Or would that come across as pitying behavior? And would he be offended if we suddenly started to treat him differently? And I'm not pointing to it as one of those toxic masculinity movies. I just think it's a really fascinating study of 70s masculine behavior, in that there's still a bit of discomfort about openly expressing your emotions, and you're meant to keep things close to the vest. At the same time, there is this sense that times are changing and men are finally finding it in themselves to open up more. And it's sort of heartwarming in a way, but it's handled in such an understated manner that it never comes across as one of those after-school specials about someone slowly, sadly dying.
You reminded me of Hoosiers, which I haven't seen in ages, but I remember being a kid in the 80s. And yes, after, I think I felt like maybe all sports movies had to be comedies. And then Hoosiers comes along. It's very serious, turning around a baseball team, but there's Hopper with the alcoholism. It was actually a very serious movie. And did he win the supporting actor Oscar for it? I think he was at least nominated.
Dennis Hopper was nominated for Hoosiers instead of Blue Velvet, but he lost to Michael Caine.
Okay, but it's yes, you look at it, and it was the first time I was like, oh, performances in a sports movie. Okay, this is Gene Hackman, of course, is the coach, and Dennis Hopper's like the alcoholic father. I need to give it a rewatch, but again, another one that I feel like is obscure nowadays, and I don't know. I feel like if you ask me about a basketball movie, ironically, I will probably say Hoosiers and Teen Wolf, which are at the complete opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to basketball movies. Erica, do you like it as comedy, as drama? Because we haven't mentioned A League of Their Own yet, which I feel like is the perfect mix of both.
Yes, it's the perfect movie of all time. It's my favorite movie of all time. It's one of those movies that, people say, you might say like, oh, I've seen that hundreds of times. I'm confident I've seen A League of Their Own hundreds of times. I know every single word. I could recite the whole film for you right now if you needed me to. It's my favorite. It's my favorite of all time. And it just happens to be a movie about women playing baseball, and it's based off a true story. It's directed by Penny Marshall, who I think, honestly, there couldn't have been anyone better for it. I love it. I grew up watching it again. And as a woman athlete playing softball, they were playing baseball, yes, but I could relate to them. I also played travel softball, like pretty much my whole life. So this whole thing about them traveling all around the country and they felt like misunderstood because they were expected to be women and classy and fancy, but they were also expected to, roll around in the dirt and play with broken fingers and, just all the things. I mean, like everything about it. I think it touches on so many different aspects of being an athlete and being a woman. And even though it was like in a time that I can't relate to, I can still relate to those things about it. Now, this whole thing of, women are expected to, fill in as baseball entertainment while these men are at war, that's just like a whole nother thing. Right. But everything about it, I think, Tom Hanks as Jimmy Dugan is just fantastic. Gina Davis is fantastic. I could go on and on and on about it. It's funny. There's drama. It pulls at your heartstrings. There's nothing that A League of Their Own doesn't do in checking the boxes of what makes a film great. And it's so rewatchable. And that is why I've seen it so many times. I don't ever not want to watch it. And I think it's the best movie ever. Like, it's my favorite. I love it so much. Hopefully you guys do too.
Offhand, if the worst thing you can say about it is people automatically think it's like a Tom Hanks vehicle. There's no crying in baseball. People think of Tom Hanks first and foremost when they think of the movie. That's like the one fault against it, but the whole ensemble is excellent, and there's
not even mad at that. Yeah,
of humor and sardonicness, and men versus women. Now, when you're right, like I love when they're sliding, but they have to wear the shorts underneath, so they're not so risque. But then they have to ice the huge bruises. And I think I stopped playing sports since COVID came along, and now if I sleep wrong or sneeze the wrong way and something hurts, and then I think, geez, remember when I used to be so proud of getting bruises and blocking shots and things like that, and it's like, oh, now everything hurts. And then like Stewie Angel when they have to have the boy with them on the road.
Yes, because like, she has to take care of her things. Yeah, yes. She has to take care of her son because her stupid husband can't. And hey, can I bring him with me on road games? And it's like she's got to be a mom and play baseball and do all these things. It's just, yeah, all of it's so good.
The chemistry and how it's like she has to choose between being married when her husband was back injured, but maybe not as attraction to Tom Hanks, but how she's going to go be a wife. Like, oh, the baseball's over. She only did one season. Like, oh, that's it now. And I got to see when they did I went to the Baseball Hall of Fame and saw all the stuff they had there, which was really cool.
So I'm actually going this spring. I've never been, and I'm going, and I'm so excited. But yeah, and actually what's interesting is obviously I've done like research on the film and stuff, and they made a Dottie Jimmy like kind of love story, and it could have gone that way. And I think the best decision Penny Marshall ever made was not making that a storyline. I think their relationship is really special in a way that doesn't get romantic. I think they love and care about each other, but in a non-romantic way. I don't know. It's just like you said, their chemistry is incredible, and he understands her and she understands him, but they don't really have these, like, they have dramatic moments, but it's not overdone. It's like perfectly done. Like I said, in a way where they have this mutual understanding. It's like an unspoken understanding too. Like they both get each other as athletes and as people. And it's like, I don't know, it's so special. And I love Tom Hanks, right? Like, who doesn't love Tom Hanks, right? And I just think, yes, his thing of like, there's no crying in baseball. And honestly, I'm not even mad at that. That's like one of my favorite like scenes. And I think it's funny. And again, it's one of those things like everyone knows. I think people know that quote and they don't even know what it's from sometimes, but I also, like, he still has his emotional moments too. And you could very easily not like him. Like he's a drunk. He kind of was really disrespectful to the women, but then like you grow to love him, and the women love him, and he loves them, whether he admits it or not. Right. And it's kind of like what Zita was saying earlier, where football season is so short, baseball season is super long. And I think they show perfectly how those things and relationships and things develop over time throughout the season. And then at the end, when you see him at the museum and it like goes down to like his little date, like, and you see that he died, like every time it chokes me up. And I'm like,
shit. And I know Tom Hanks is alive, and I'm just like, but Jimmy Dugan's dead. And it just freaking rips my heart out every time.
There's the no crying in baseball, and there's the Madonna doing the what if I happen to have my uniform rip open, oops, my bosom spot,
and one of my bosoms comes flying out.
Whereas Donald's like, you think these men haven't seen your bosom? And it's like, I feel like I guess the marketing
in your bosoms.
Like the marketing, I think, got it right of like, oh, this is a baseball comedy, like, because I guess there's going to be an element of people who are going to watch it like, oh, girls in baseball, oh, this is going to be funny. And then I think that kind of brings you into it, and then you see that this is a more serious piece. And the way you're right, the travel on the road, like it's so silly. I get choked up by the goofy song, the members of the All American League, cities, like it's so silly, but it's like just the way they bond, like they are a family.
Well, and exactly like you said, right? Like it was marketed as like, oh, women playing baseball, but that was like actually what was happening at the time and actually happening in the film, right? Like that was part of the story of like women playing baseball. Like, oh, this can't be a real thing. And I love when Ellen Sue throws the ball at that guy on top of the dugout and just like knocks him out. And she's like, what? It's lit. It's just like, it's so good because, women are better at men than most things. And we just don't get the platform to prove it. Right. And so when we finally got the platform to prove it, it's like, oh, these women, and then the story of like how they were going to shut down the league and like they kept it going. It's just all of it. And then at the end they show the older women and they're still playing. I mean, it's just the best. It's just I could like gush about it forever. And I love that it's like based off a true story, and it, these women really experience these things. And I'm sure a lot of people out there have seen, there was a documentary on Netflix. God, what was it called now? About one of the women who played and how she, hid like her identity for a long time about being a lesbian, and finally coming out with that. And then of course like the new Amazon Prime series that Abby Jacobson did of the same name, A League of Their Own, and telling these, like she paid such respect and homage to the film, but made these stories different and showed different sides of the stories about these women who were queer and different, and how they played in this league and found each other and felt like they had met people that were like them. And it's just such an important story. And I think the series, like I said, I think it took a different angle, but still, like, how you get nervous when there's like a remake or a continuation, sequel, prequel, whatever you want to call it, of something that you love so much. And I was so worried about this coming out, but I love Abby Jacobson. Like I've been a fan of her since Broad City, and she went to MICA, which is in Baltimore, the art school in Baltimore, but she did such a good job with it. And I was so worried about it. But then when it came out, I was like, okay, this is great. Like, and I think this could be like a really good companion piece for people like me who are obsessed with the original film, right, from the early 90s. But here's this more modernized story of what happened to these women at that time that really is what happened to them, but it's told in just a different way, if that makes sense.
I've encouraged Zita a lot to watch more women's ice hockey, and the league had changed their name to drop National Women's Hockey League because they've had a new LGBTQ kind of policy. So they just said, we want to remove women from, because they've had stories of folks being transgender, and there's all these questions about who has the right to play in what league, and it's like and I when I started playing ice hockey, first I started playing with boys, and then I was the youngest, and I was on a team where I was the only non-lesbian, and it was like, I didn't care because it was like, I just want to play hockey. And it's like, it doesn't matter to me what else you're doing. As long as we're all playing on the ice, you do what you're supposed to do. I could care less,
right.
So I feel like, I guess I was at the right age or the right window where I saw somebody as, well, it's their athleticism is what matters. That has nothing to do. That's, their private thing, but at the time, I had teammates who were scared they were going to be found out, that they'd lose their jobs, the ones that wanted to adopt and couldn't, so it's like these stories aren't being told, and real sports hasn't caught up with these things yet. We're still having a lot of these abuse scandals happening, like Hockey Canada getting caught with all these kind of scandals and things, so it's so frustrating. On one hand, I've said to Zita, you have to watch this stuff, watch these sports, support this women's hockey. I'm like, but there's always some kind of controversy. Zita, we never had your thoughts on A League of Their Own.
Oh, yes, a lovely, charming comedy. And I completely concur with everything that Erica said. And in talking about hockey, I also think that we should acknowledge the legacy of Slapshot, which is, if I understand correctly, a film that Kristin also rather likes. And I was kind of surprised when I watched it that I was able to relate to it, just because it's meant to be this very masculine film. And I worried, oh God, have my life experiences not equipped me to fully relate to these characters? But it's a really effective, gritty 1970s character study. You've got a great leading performance from Paul Newman, a really strong feel for the location. And again, it's appealing to see a sports movie that is about people who are not on the top rungs. They are struggling to get by. It's not as though they're in the most dire situation, but there's not this sense of life or death suspense whenever one of their games rolls around. And maybe the synthesis between some of the slapstick comedy and some of the more serious elements of the plot isn't quite as strong as it could have been, but it's definitely much better than you would expect a vulgar sports comedy to be.
I love Slapshot. I was thinking I would have to save it to the end and I'd have to predicate it because there's racism in it, there's homophobia in it. It's written by a woman who was the sister of a hockey player, and they had hockey players in the movie. And and Paul Newman out there actually playing hockey said it was his favorite experience ever. So the hockey in it is good, even if you've got some silly, stupid things, and the brawls, of course, the big strip down on the ice at the end, but there's just so much of it clicks because everyone is so likable. And even like the French is the Quebecois. When I speak French, my French accent is horrible, but it's like the French, like Quebec slang that gets like undercut in like some of like the goalie speaking French. And there's like so many like moments that you shouldn't laugh at, but you do anyway. And it's so funny because I was thinking of this last week when we did the Christmas episode, because the mom in A Christmas Story is one of the women that Paul Newman is in bed with in this movie. And they're having a whole conversation where she's sitting there topless and she's talking about having had sexual encounters with another one of the teammates' wives. When how they're away, they started getting it on. And, and it's a very frank conversation. Or Paul Newman's laying there saying, well, I never felt that way about a man, but I don't know, but women are beautiful. And you're like, this is kind of weird because she's topless, but it's a really honest, mature conversation. And you're like, and your mind's blown when you're like, it's the mom from A Christmas Story. And then like they go play in the game and he's playing against her husband and he's like skating by ragged her like, she's a lesbian. And there's so many like jokes where that's how like he blackmails like Strother Martin. He's like, remember that time I saw you wearing like those fishnet stockings, so tell me who the team owner is so I could go to ask her to, not to move the team. There's just so many wonderful things in Slapshot. I think it's a movie that keeps on giving every time you see it. There's something new and wonderful and exciting. And now there's merchandise and the Hanson Brothers stuff and everything. And it's so funny because I did not think Zita would like it. On one hand, I thought, oh, Zita would hate this movie, but then I thought, I bet you she would actually enjoy it. But I think that's just on Paul Newman's charisma. There's just so many wonderful things in it. I love it. Erica, do you like Slapshot?
I've never seen it.
Yes.
Now I need to watch it.
Well, how do you feel about hockey movies now?
I like hockey movies. You mentioned Mighty Ducks earlier, and I think that's one that we grew up on. That yes, I agree with you. You said it's very silly and very like unrealistic things, but I think that's what makes it what it is. Yeah, and it's just like it's like a bunch of misfits like together, right? Which was like kind of like Sandlot too. But I also I think I mentioned this earlier, but I don't think we were recording. I do love Miracle. Miracle is like one of those classic hockey, triumph stories. My roommate in college, she and I would quote the speech that the coach gives to each other, back and forth to each other. It's just one of those like, pulls at the heartstrings and patriotic,
It's
stories.
like Miracle, of course, is based on the true story of the 1980 U.S. Olympic hockey team. But it's so funny when I always think of that and Mystery Alaska in the same thought, which is like kind of so preposterous, like, oh, we're just going to have like amateurs versus like the pros, like, Russell Crowe, building an ice rink in his backyard. Like there are movies that like I could get frustrated about the hockey. And, but yeah, I can also go along with the story. But I mean, Kurt Russell also, again, I think had like a hockey experience. His son, the one who's like Captain America, the fake Captain America, Wyatt Russell, he played all kinds of hockey. It's funny that you have to research like I have to know, like, what is this person's ice hockey experience when they're making a hockey movie? And I'm like, Russell Crowe is making a hockey movie. I'm like, well, I'll go along with it because it's a charming, funny movie. But because last week, Zita on the 300 Passions podcast, she was talking about ice castles, which Lynn Holly Johnson was a figure skater. And she also has some figure skating moments in For Your Eyes Only, which is so funny because it was the James Bond movie, like that. It came out in an Olympic year. So, of course, he's, skiing and having, hockey shenanigans and, all snow kind of things are happening in the movie. And she's in that as well. And I don't know what else she really made. She's also in Watcher in the Woods, isn't she? Zita, how did you feel about ice castles again?
Oh, it's pretty dreadful, as you would expect a movie to be when its premise involves a blind girl winning a figure skating competition. It's so cheesy, but also not cheesy enough. There are so many bad 80s movies like Weird Science, which I watched recently. Very creepy movie, not especially funny, oddly structured, and yet it has this so bad it's good charm.
Yeah, I remember ice castles. I remember being very popular, even though you're like, this is so kitsch,
Yes.
but I don't know, maybe that's just me. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, I thought Erica was going to say something.
I was just going to say, I've never seen it or never even heard of it. I don't even know what you guys are talking about, but blind woman winning an ice skating competition sounds interesting. Like I might need to check that out too.
But I think, I tolerated it then again because she was a figure skater. And it's also, you have to picture, I mean, figure skating in 1978, when this came out, was very, what was her name? Dorothy Hamill. Where all the women did was did a nice leg pose and spun around. It was very simple compared to today where we have this scandals where they have like little 15-year-old girls who are like 80 pounds who have to do like quads, like spin 4 times immediately fast. Like the female figure skating was almost very boring. Like the Sonia Henney, it was just meant to be pretty and graceful, and you didn't actually do a whole lot. That's really why I don't really like figure skating. I like pairs figure skating, that I will watch in the Olympics. But it's like the figure skating, I guess, was kind of decent. It's so funny because Zita, I thought you were going to talk about The Cutting Edge.
I have never seen that movie, so I couldn't. I know a line from the trailer where they refer to the main character, who's this very spoiled rich girl, and they say her nickname rhymes with rich, and clearly it's meant to be bitch. And so they're advertising this movie to little, I guess, 12-year-old girls, and so they can't get away with using the B word. But I remember thinking, oh gosh, that's so cheesy.
Yeah, that was the movie where I didn't like the hockey in it. And of course, the cliche of like, oh, the hockey player has to become a figure skater. And of course, they're partners and they're going to fall in love. And I don't know, I remember probably watching it more times than it deserves. But I feel like I look back at it now of like, it's not really a good movie. It has a lot of problems. And I'm sure, and I think there were like direct to video, like all kinds of sequels and everything. Because I know Erica wanted to talk about I, Tonya as well, which again, I feel like that's what really put female figure skating on the map, that the infamy of the Nancy Kerrigan, even though before that, you think of like Katarina Witt, actually becoming an actress, and things like that. You're like, oh, but wait, there was figure skating before Nancy Kerrigan and Tonya Harding and the knee. Why, Erica?
Yeah, I love I, Tonya. Well, I love Margot Robbie, so I think that's part of it. But also, the 30 for 30 documentaries, that was like a very famous one. With Nancy Kerrigan and the the controversy around that. So that was, I love I, Tonya too, because I think the way the story is told is really interesting, and it's really rough around the edges and really brash and, just kind of different. I love that it's something so like elegant and classy as figure skating. And then we have this character who, she wasn't elegant and classy, and she was one of the best, and she was very controversial. And then it's around this whole thing. I really loved all the actors and actresses in it. And of course, Allison Janney winning the supporting actress Oscar for it. I thought she was fantastic. Yeah, I love it. I think it's a really different type of sports movie and really well done. The only thing that really bothered me in it is some of the editing with Margot Robbie's face in, whoever the double was doing the skating. Some of that is just so not good, and it just kind of like ruins it for me for a second. But then I'm just like, okay, it's a movie, Erica, don't be so critical of that. But yeah, that kind of takes me out of it in those very brief moments. But otherwise, I think it's really well done, and like I said, the acting's fantastic, and it's just such an interesting story too, right? I don't know if you ladies have seen the 30 for 30 documentary, but it's just one of those, I'm also like a true crime junkie, and I feel like it's one of those things like I can't get enough of, so I don't know how you guys feel about it, but it's one of my favorites.
This is where we come back to women in sports and sports movies, because figure skating, yes, is a very rich white or Asian kind of sport. Back in the 90s, when you first had Black women joining figure skating, and that's what made Tonya Harding popular, because she was the girl from the wrong side of the tracks in this rich sport. And again, I've been at ice rinks where it was so frustrating having to share ice time with figure skaters, because they would lower the temperature of the ice to soften it so they could do like their jumps, but then they would try and refreeze the Olympic ice surface, and it wouldn't always freeze right, so then like your puck or your stick or your skate would get caught. But one rink that I had lived before I moved down here more out back was actually a rink that was owned by figure skaters, and they would have like 6 o'clock in the morning, figure skating would start, and it would be little kids 5 and 6 years old, where it's like do it again, like the pressure, the extreme like that they go through in order to do this. And you think of, yes, how much money all this ice time costs, and the costumes and the travel. So it is really a very exclusive elite sport. And then there's all kinds of these controversies at the top. And then you have this person comes along who on one hand, people like loved cheering like Tonya Harding on initially, because they thought, oh yes, she's literally from the wrong side of the tracks. But there were actually a lot of people that did not like her, because they would say, she's uglier, she's heavier. That Nancy Kerrigan was the beautiful prima donna, and how could she be competing with her? This idea that like women only make money at sports when they're like in golf or tennis, or figure skating is that we only watch it when it's a pretty girl, kind of thing. So it's like, it's very frustrating, that's why I find it to be such a frustrating thing. But then as I said, I love pairs figure skating, where it's like, let's just, throw the little woman up in the air and hope that she lands. Zita, how did you feel about I, Tonya?
Oh, very impressive film. And as Erica pointed out, I do wonder why we don't get more fictionalized dramatizations of sports-related controversies. There have been so many cases in which we find out about doping, or we discover that a trainer was incredibly abusive, or even figure skating related. I believe that they discovered at the 2002 Olympics that the members of the Russian government had conspired to rig the competition, and then they changed nothing. The Olympic Committee, absolutely nothing changed after they revealed that. So clearly that is a problem, and yet we don't really get narrative feature films about these topics. It tends to be documentaries that focus on these sorts of issues. And even, sports movies as a whole, if you asked someone to name the greatest sports movie of all time, a lot of people might say Hoop Dreams, which is the epic documentary about a group of basketball players and their struggles to make it, and also just the African-American experience in a country in which it is incredibly difficult to earn money if you are not born as this exceptionally talented athlete. And when it comes to feature films, they do seem to have this barrier put up when it comes to grappling with these issues. And I would like to see more films in the vein of I, Tonya, but I imagine that it is difficult to go in to a big studio and pitch this project that's about, say, the FIFA corruption scandal. It's intriguing to me as a viewer, but I imagine that if you were trying to pitch this movie right down the middle to soccer fans, that is something that they don't even want to think about. And to get political for a moment, with the current FIFA World Cup, you have so many people saying things like, well, I just want to enjoy the sport. Stop talking about politics. And it's ridiculous. You have a case at the moment where there might have been foul play involved in the murder of a journalist, even though they claim that he died from natural causes. That is very scary, and we can't just look the other way when it comes to this sort of thing. And I also think it's a common complaint with these sports movies that they lack depth and they go for this very easy underdog narrative. And in the case of I, Tonya, you cannot say that that is a story that makes it easy to root for the protagonist. And I do wonder, would we hold a lot of these sports movies in much higher regard if they were based around these real life scandals?
Now, it's funny, you brought up some of the controversies. I wonder if there's some kind of unspoken thing between sports and movies, because the sports look for the controversy as the entertainment, as the popular kind of scandal, because every Olympic year I could give you the figure skating controversy. They just had the ones with the girl refusing her medal and walking off the ice and sobbing during the national anthem. You know, they had the pairs who they ended up giving 2 golds because the judges were fixed. You know, there's always been these Olympic controversies, particularly in figure skating. And I feel like that's almost what the sport thrives upon. And briefly, I mentioned 8 Men Out, and it's like that took almost not 100 years, but 80 years for them to actually talk about that 1919 Black Sox scandal, you know, and it's a bitter movie. And again, another thing that turned out people who were accused and banned, you know, didn't actually really do anything. But then we, you know, in my era, it was people talking about like all the Pete Rose kind of scandals. And like I said, I love Andy Pettitte. I'd like to see Andy Pettitte get in, but you know, in the Hall of Fame, but then it's like, I could care less what happens to Roger Clemens, you know, because, and again, and in fact, when I went to the Baseball Hall of Fame, when I saw all the women's league, it was the thing back then was the, oh gosh, Sammy Sosa. And oh Lord, what was his name? I don't even remember when they were having the home run race, breaking all the home run records, and then they found out they all had backs. Yes, thank you. And it was like completely rigged and fixed. You know, and my mother has even said this when we're looking at like the NHL draft lottery or something, where she'll be like, that team deliberately lost just so they could get the #1 draft pick. You know, so I don't know. Sports in its own way thrives on controversy just as much as it does when it's feel good underdogs. Erica, did you have any other movies that you wanted to discuss?
No, I think those are my top ones. But I think we talked about some interesting things with I, Tonya, and just like the things around the sport too, like the judging and you know how you're talking about how different figure skating, like the sport used to be. And it made me think of gymnastics. And there's this film that I don't know if anyone has seen it. I feel like I'm
American Anthem.
What?
Are you going to talk about American Anthem?
No.
80s, oh my gosh, the 80s movie. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Zita.
Is it Stick It?
Yes. Do you love Stick It?
Yes, Jeff Bridges amazing in that movie.
Thank you. Oh my God, my boyfriend teases me for this, but he's so good in that, and it's such a good story, and it's like
this story about how these women come together and try to change the sport and the things that are wrong with it. And that's one that, like, I've seen that movie an embarrassing amount of times. I've watched it so many times, but it's so good. Oh my God, Zita, I'm so glad you knew what I was going to say.
Yeah, that's a really fun movie. It's a good movie to go on.
Yes. Oh my gosh, it's so good. You guys should watch it if you haven't seen it.
And
no, that's what I was going to say. Did you have more surprise movies you wanted to get out?
I just thought before we wrap things up here, we sort of need to address the elephant in the room, which is boxing. I know at the start of the podcast, we all agreed that baseball is the best movie sport. I would still stand by that, but I would argue that boxing has this position as almost the most respectable of all of the movie sports. You have so many art films that are about boxers. You have something like Raging Bull, which is, at this point, you could say arguably the most acclaimed traditional sports movie. And you have Rocky, you have all of these films that I would say are critically acclaimed in a way that some of the baseball movies we referenced just aren't. And this is awful to admit. I can't quite build up the enthusiasm for Raging Bull that I feel I should have. It is a great movie. I am not denying that. You watch it, you think, wow, Martin Scorsese, he can direct the hell out of a movie. It's a 5-star film. I don't disagree with anyone who puts it on their ballot for the greatest films of all time. At the same time, I don't love it in the way that I feel I should. And when I discuss Martin Scorsese's greatest movies, I sort of tend to forget about it. So this is just my guilty admission. And then I guess you also have Champion. You have all of those film noirs from back in the day where the main character is this pugilist. I have to admit that I don't necessarily consider those films to be sports movies because I tend to think, well, okay, but it's his job, but it's not as though it's a central facet of the narrative that, say, Burt Lancaster in The Killers needs to win a fight. He's a boxer at the beginning of the movie. He injures his hand and then he can't do it anymore. So I guess that's a bit of a blurred line there.
I think we were so excited. We talk about like the team sports always being like the excellent, like matching cinema, rah, rah, rah. But boxing, I guess because it's so individual, I feel has a different kind of drama to it. It's so funny. Like there's the Russell Crowe Gladiator. There was an older movie in the 90s called Gladiator with Cuba Gooding Jr. And it was like amateur boxing, Brian Denny, like, you know, underbelly kind of in the ring kind of stuff. And I remember thinking this was like the greatest movie ever. Of course it's not, but it's just this, I don't know, the singular of, you know, look, this person can beat this other person better, you know. So, you know, I go through phases where I do love boxing. I used to love the Klitschko brothers and Oscar De La Hoya, things like that. But it's so funny. Like, I feel like I don't even really follow that many sports anymore, you know, but, you know, there's so many, like, I guess, beloved. And of course, I'm from Philly Rocky. You know, I don't know if Silver Linings Playbook is not a sports movie per se. I know everybody loves that movie now. But I'm like, yeah, okay, it was great. I think he should have won, not her, which I know is kind of a terrible thing to say. But of course, here, Rocky is like so huge and so excellent and so wonderful. And I don't know if this is particular, not just an Americanism, but an Italian Americanism thing, especially if you're talking about Raging Bull and Rocky Marciano, that again, there is this singular triumph of underdog overcoming who's the immigrant who doesn't fit in, who has to have a training montage that everything works out. Erica, how do you feel about boxing movies?
It's funny that you that we brought this up because I like Rocky. Everyone likes Rocky, right? But I don't know if any of you have ever listened to the Binge Movies podcast. I actually was on that defending so basically what they do is they have all these different films from a different year or whatever, you know, sports movies, whatever, and you have to defend it and save one to go in the vault, like to be preserved for all time. And I actually chose to defend Saving Private Ryan, that it's better than Rocky. And I think people hated me for it, but Saving Private Ryan is a better film. Again, I don't know why we were comparing those two or fighting for those two. I don't know, whatever. But I think Rocky is good, but I think for me with boxing movies, I just don't know if I love boxing because it's so violent. And I struggle with that. And it's funny, actually, last night we went to go see The Fabelmans in the theater, and there was a big poster for the new Creed movie. And I said to my boyfriend, I'm like, I've never seen any of the Creed movies. Like, we should watch that. Like, we usually do like a marathon or something for New Year's Eve. And I'm like, should we watch the Creed movies for New Year's Eve? Like, I've never seen any of them, So, and I like Michael B. Jordan. So I'm like, okay, like maybe I'll watch it. But I'm also kind of like, I don't want to see people beat each other up. Like, is that so like weak of me? I don't know. I just don't like the violence of boxing. But I do love Rocky, but I've only ever seen the first one. I've never seen any of the sequels, which is probably
no. Oh, come on. What? I do love, well, Rocky 3 has the sad moment, of course, Apollo. But 4 I loved, which I felt guilty, like, oh, I love Dolph Lundgren in this movie. I will break you, but again, they add on the American versus the Soviet rah 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 kind of stuff. Yeah. And I guess maybe the thing about Rocky also is like, it was low budget at the time, like their own money, scrambling behind the scenes. So it was like the little movie that could at the same time. And maybe today, I don't know that could be done. Like, so many small things come through the cracks, don't make what they need to do. So I don't know. I do like boxing movies more than I should. You were being ultra feminist if you said you don't like them because they're violent. That is the kind of opinion I suspect people probably expected us to say.
I do like Rocky though. Like, I love the character. He's great. Adrian. I just don't, I should say I don't like, not that I don't like the sport of boxing, but like boxing and like UFC, like fighting and stuff. And just like, these people are beating the shit out of each other. This is not fun for me. Like, I don't like this. I don't like the way it feels. Like, I don't know, whatever, call me whatever you want.
So I went through that phase of like Jean-Claude Van Damme movies, and a lesser known Olivier Grunet was like the French like kickboxing champion, and he made some really cool sci-fi movies where it was like, oh, look at these, again, because of the person actually knows their stuff, they're doing the stunts. Maybe that's what it is about the movies. I loved when the sports stunts are really being done. Like today we think, oh, they'll just add in all the rough and tumble CGI kind of things, where even the other day when I was watching Conan the Barbarian, Sandala Bergman was doing the stunts. And I was like, why don't we applaud stunt people more doing these things? Like you said, with the sneaky editing with Margot Robbie, but I've always thought, why don't they wear like in the amateur boxing, they wear the helmets. Why don't they wear the headgear in professional? But that wouldn't sell a lot of the pay-per-view tickets. Again, it's just as much entertainment as it is sport. I don't know. Zita, did you have any more favorites that you were going to say?
No. I think we went through all of my favorite ones, I would say.
Did you have any final thoughts?
Well, I really enjoyed this discussion, and I do hope that in the coming years we do start to get slightly less formulaic sports movies. And I know there are problems with the true crime genre as a whole, but I would hope that sports movies sort of start to take on more of the storytelling techniques from that genre. And I also think it helps that in most of these sports-related controversies, you're not dealing with things like people being violently murdered, and then the question of whether it's exploitative to tell a story about the person who killed them. In most of these cases, it's some wealthy 75-year-old Swiss marketing person who was accepting bribes from French officials. It's not as though anyone was dying because of this corruption, but it's still interesting to consider the fallout from, say, the FIFA scandal. And I guess you could have something similar to that documentary that they made recently about the university admissions scandal, where it's all about the bizarre ways in which rich people convince themselves that they need to be corrupt. Because one of the interesting things about that documentary is that most of these rich people had children who were smart enough to get into a top university based on their grades, and their parents became so paranoid that they convinced themselves that, oh no, Charlotte, she can't do it on her own. We have to hire this random guy to bring in a 40-year-old man to do Charlotte's test for her.
You remind me of a film. We actually didn't talk about films that we dislike. A film that I saw that I was kind of really disappointed in, called The Catcher Was a Spy. And it was about a real life former baseball player who may or not been bisexual, but was off going and doing spy things in World War II. And it just, I wanted to write about this movie, but then I felt bad being negative. But I thought my headline could just be "The Catcher Was a Spy drops the ball," because it just was disappointing. It was a 90-minute movie, and it should have been like undercover baseball espionage at 40s period piece. Then he's going into behind enemy lines in Europe because he's going to maybe assassinate this person to stop this person from completing like Germany's atom bomb. And you're like, this should have been so intense. And I'm just like, and Paul Rudd is in it. And I'm like, I'm disappointed. I was kind of like, darn, this had everything. And it should have come together, and it didn't. Now, Zita, it's funny. I need you to be like all the sports romances. What are you talking about on the 300 Passions podcast now?
Oh gosh, so I'm about to talk about Play It Again, Sam. So that should be an enjoyable discussion with one of my close friends. And then after that, I'm going to talk about Love and Pain and the Whole Damn Thing, a film in which Maggie Smith, in, I believe, her late 30s, dates a younger man. So that should be interesting to get into.
And Erica, you had written about some baseball movies at InSessionFilm.com. And where else had you spoken? At Binge Podcast or at Cinefied?
Yeah, the Binge Movies podcast was Rocky, but I was defending Saving Private Ryan. So I guess I was like kind of not supporting Rocky, I guess. I don't know. That was a while ago, but you can find it on my link tree. And then I don't think I've done any sports movies at Cinefied, but anytime anybody wants to talk League of Their Own, hit me up, or Moneyball. Anytime anybody wants to talk those, let me know.
And you are at eRock Reviews on Twitter, the hot mess that it is. And Zita is at the 300 podcast. I'm at Therefore Review on Twitter as well. So you can read what we've written at InSessionFilm.com, or you could follow our flagship at InSessionFilm. Now we're going to be getting into holiday and award season. Things are going to be coming up soon. You could also follow the flagship podcast, their bonus content on Patreon. So thank you for listening, and see you at the next Women in Session.